The train hissed as it pulled out of Penn Station, leaving behind the noise of New York City and ushering in the soft, humming silence of transition. Eloise Marston watched the skyline fade, her gloved fingers gripping a worn leather suitcase that had once belonged to her father. Her gaze didn't wander far from the city's edge until the horizon was swallowed by trees and farmland. She hadn't told anyone she was leaving. Not her boss at the firm, not her friends. Not even Evan, who had proposed to her just 2 weeks ago and hadn't stopped texting since her sudden disappearance. Only one person knew. A stranger. A man in a dark suit who appeared at her office 3 days prior, handed her a sealed envelope, and disappeared without a word. The letter inside was brief. It read, "Miss Marston, you are the sole heir of the Bellwether estate, located in Port Huron, Michigan. This inheritance is non-transferable and requires your immediate presence. All costs are covered. Please arrive before the 12th of October. There will be instructions. R. Vallon." Eloise had never heard of a Bellwether estate. Her family had no ties to Michigan, or so she thought. Her parents had died in a car crash when she was 10, and she had grown up in various homes and guardianships throughout the state of New York. No extended family ever came forward. Yet here she was. Hours passed. She changed trains twice. Ate nothing. Slept only in fits. By the time she arrived in Port Huron, the sun was fading, casting the streets in an orange-pink glow. A black car waited at the curb. The driver held a placard. Marston. The ride to Bellwether took 20 minutes. Eloise tried to ask questions. The driver said nothing, only nodded. Then the house came into view. It was not what she expected. Not a crumbling mansion. Not a haunted Victorian relic. Bellwether stood proud atop a cliffside. Its windows lit from within. Its facade sleek but softened by ivy and age. It looked like a place that had lived several lifetimes and worn each era well. Eloise stepped out into the gravel drive, the wind from Lake Huron colder than expected. The front door opened before she knocked. A woman stood there, mid-50s, dressed in deep green. Her hair was tightly pinned. Her gaze sharp. "Miss Marston," she said with the air of someone who had known her forever. "We've been waiting." Eloise hesitated. "Who are you?" "My name is Iris. I'm the housekeeper." "And this," she stepped aside, "is your inheritance." The foyer glowed. The chandeliers lit. A fire crackled in a distant room. Bellwether was alive in a way Eloise hadn't felt in years. "What exactly did I inherit?" she asked, her voice small against the marble. Iris gave her a thin smile. "Everything that was hidden from you." Eloise's room was at the end of the east wing. Tall windows looked out over the cliff. A canopy bed stood in the center, untouched for decades by the look of it. Yet the linens were fresh. The fire in the hearth was warm. She had barely sat down when a knock sounded at her door. It was Iris, holding a tray. "Dinner will be ready shortly. You should eat. It's going to be a long night." "Why?" "Because the house only allows its secrets to surface once. And tonight, it listens." Eloise blinked. "I'm sorry. What does that mean?" Iris placed the tray on a nearby table and left without another word. The dining room was long and formal, its walls lined with portraits. None of them were labeled. But some of the faces Eloise could have sworn they looked familiar, like dreams she'd forgotten. Dinner was solitary. Iris sat at the far end, silent. A young man in a gray vest served quietly. He never met her eyes. Afterward, Eloise wandered the halls. The silence of the house had changed. It felt denser, watchful. She turned a corner and stopped. There, outside the study door, was a letter. Folded. No envelope. The first key is memory. Ask not what was taken, but what was erased. RV. She picked it up, turned the doorknob. The study was massive. Books lined every wall. A grandfather clock ticked softly. On the desk, a black journal bound in velvet. Inside, a name. Mabel Marston. Her grandmother, The journal held entries from decades ago. Some were mundane, others strange. She's waking again. Last night I heard the lullaby through the walls. If she remembers, it all comes down. I've hidden the key in the clock. Only she will know how to find it. Eloise stood, walked to the clock, opened its face. Behind the pendulum taped to the wood was a small silver key. The clock struck midnight. Somewhere deep in the house, a door unlocked. The sound echoed like a breath. And Eloise realized, this place didn't just remember. It was waiting. The echo of the unlocking door faded, but the chill it left behind lingered in Eloise's spine. She turned slowly, holding the small silver key like a relic, and stepped back into the hallway. The house, bellwether, no longer hummed quietly. It seemed to breathe. Down the corridor, a faint creak sounded, like a slow exhale. Eloise followed it, her footsteps soft on the worn wooden floors. The sconces flickered. Something about the air had changed. The scent of lavender, old and dusted, was replaced by the sharper bite of iron and damp stone. At the far end of the hall was a door she hadn't noticed earlier, not when she'd passed by it an hour ago, not in the floor plans Iris had casually left by her bedside. The door was slightly ajar now, revealing nothing but darkness. She reached for the knob. It didn't turn. Then she remembered the key. Silver. Cold. It slid in perfectly. Click. The door creaked open. Inside was a narrow stairwell that spiraled downward. No light. No sounds. Just stone walls. And the faint whisper of something that felt like memory. She descended. The basement wasn't musty, as she expected. It was quiet, yes but clean, curated. Almost ceremonial. Candles lined the walls in iron holders, recently burned. A long table ran down the center of the room. Books. Maps. Yellowed paper. But what caught her eye was a mirror. Framed in tarnished gold, the mirror stood at the far end of the basement, taller than she was, leaned slightly back as if watching the room. Etched into the base were the words, "Only when the air looks backward, may she walk forward." Eloise stepped closer. Her reflection stared back, paler than she remembered, her eyes wide and rimmed with exhaustion. Then her reflection blinked. But she hadn't. She stepped back instinctively. Behind her, the stairwell groaned and shut. She ran to it, pulled, locked. "Hello?" she called. Only the echo answered. She turned back to the mirror. Now it showed not her face, but a room. A nursery. A child sat on the floor, singing softly. Eloise leaned in. The tune was one she didn't know. But her mouth knew it. Her lips moved in sync with the girl's. She gasped. It was her. The girl looked up. Behind her, a woman stood in shadow. Eloise couldn't see the woman's face, but the presence was familiar. The shape. The way she touched the child's shoulder. Then the mirror cracked. Not shattered, just a thin, straight fracture across the center. The image vanished, and in its place was another journal. This one lying on the table behind her. She hadn't seen it before. It was leather-bound, with the initials E.M., Eloise Marston. She picked it up. The pages inside were filled with her handwriting. Dozens of entries, but she had never written them. I saw her again. The woman in green. She keeps saying the word remember, like it's a spell. There's a boy. He says his name is Silas. He's always near the mirror. I dream in this house. But the dreams don't stop when I wake. Eloise backed away, heart pounding. Someone had recorded memories under her name. Or she had. But had forgotten. Her head throbbed. A knock came. Sharp. 3 taps against the stone wall. She turned. No one. Another knock, this time from the ceiling. Then the left wall. The room was knocking back. A hidden door swung open in the far corner, revealing a corridor lit by dim yellow lamps. She didn't hesitate this time. The corridor led her to what looked like an underground conservatory. Glass walls surrounded the room, but instead of looking outside, They looked inward, reflecting distorted versions of her face. And in the center, a boy. Thin, pale, no older than 10. He stood barefoot on the stone floor, humming the same lullaby. Eloise froze. He looked up. "You're late," he said. She blinked. "Who are you?" "You already know." "Silas?" He nodded. "You're real?" He looked around. "Everything is. Even what you forgot." She stepped closer. "Why am I here?" Silas tilted his head. "Because you asked to remember. And Bellwether only answers when it's ready." He turned and walked through a mirror, vanished. Eloise ran to the glass. Nothing but her reflection. Then another letter appeared, lying at her feet. "Do not follow him. Not yet. The second key is choice. To remember is one path. To remain forgotten is another. But both have consequences. R.V." She folded the letter and slid it into her coat pocket. Then the ceiling above began to rumble. Dust fell. The ground trembled. The house was waking up again. She needed to get out. She ran back through the corridor, into the basement, and to the sealed stairwell. She banged on it. "Let me out." The mirror lit up again. This time, her reflection was not alone. The woman from the earlier vision stood beside her. This time, Eloise saw her face. It was Iris, but younger, and her eyes, they were the same shade as Eloise's. Iris wasn't just the housekeeper. She was family. The stairwell door unlocked, and Eloise stepped into the hall. Above, the chandeliers flickered like candlelight. She turned a corner and Iris was there, waiting. "I think it's time," Eloise said. "For what?" Iris asked gently. "For you to tell me the truth." Iris gave a slow nod. "In the morning," she said, and vanished into the dark. Eloise barely slept. The fire in the hearth crackled low, and outside her tall bedroom windows, the wind whipped off Lake Huron in cold gusts that rattled the panes. But it wasn't the cold or the wind that kept her awake. It was Iris. And what Eloise now knew. The housekeeper wasn't just staff. She was part of whatever long-buried history this house was trying to unearth. And if the vision in the mirror had been true, and Eloise was beginning to suspect everything in this house had its own truth, then Iris had once lived here. As family. At dawn, Eloise got out of bed. The house was quiet again. The tension of the night seemingly dissolved into morning fog. She dressed in a thick wool sweater she found in the wardrobe and padded down the long hallway toward the kitchen. Iris was already there. She stood by the stove, stirring a pot of something fragrant. Her hair was braided this morning, and there was a softness to her features that hadn't been there the night before. "Good morning," Iris said without turning. "Is it?" Eloise asked. Iris chuckled softly. "That depends on what you choose to ask." Eloise sat. "I saw you. In the mirror. With me when I was a child." Iris turned. Her eyes weren't surprised. "That was before the forgetting. Before you were sent away." "Why? Why was I sent away?" Iris set the spoon down and walked to the table. She placed a steaming cup of tea in front of Eloise, then sat across from her. "Because your mother made a bargain. And bargains with Bellwether come at a cost." Eloise's breath hitched. "My mother? I was told they died in a car accident." "They did. But not before she tried to undo what she had asked for." Iris looked at her hands. "Your mother was raised here too. Bellwether chooses who it remembers. And who it lets go. But some things are never fully erased." Eloise stared at the woman. "Are you my grandmother?" A long pause. Iris smiled sadly. "I'm your great-aunt. Your grandmother, Mabel, was my sister. She died in this house by choice. And I stayed to protect what was left of her. Of you." Eloise absorbed that in silence. "And Silas?" Iris stiffened. "Silas is not a person. Not anymore. He was a boy. A long time ago. Bellwether holds echoes of him. Of many. He was the first sacrifice." Sacrifice? The price to protect the bloodline. To ensure memory didn't destroy us all. Eloise stood abruptly. This is madness. You're saying my family made sacrifices to a house? Iris stood too. Number. To a memory. To something older than us all. Bellwether is just the vessel. The room felt like it was spinning. Eloise backed away. I need air, she muttered. She turned and left the kitchen, pushing through the parlor and out the back doors into the winter garden. The frost still clung to the dead stems. Fog rolled low, curling like fingers across the soil. She stumbled to a wrought iron bench and sat hard, her breath fogging. Her entire life had been a lie, and she had willingly walked back into it. Back inside the house, something else had changed. As she walked the halls again, the portraits were clearer. Names appeared beneath faces. Marston. Vale. Dane. Generations she had never known. And then she saw it. A small portrait tucked between two grander frames. A woman holding a child. The woman looked exactly like her. The child, it was her. A brass plaque read, Lillian Marston and daughter, Eloise. 1995. She stepped closer. The woman's eyes were terrified. Eloise reached out. The painting was warm to the touch. Suddenly, her hand ached. She pulled it back to find her fingers smeared in red painter, what she thought was paint. It felt too warm. Too thick. A note fluttered to the floor. The third key is blood. It stains. It seals. And it speaks. You cannot unlock what you are not willing to bleed for. She stared at the note. The blood on her hand had vanished. That night, she dreamed again. She stood in the basement. Silas beside her. He held a candle. You're almost ready. What happens if I remember everything? She asked. Silas looked up at her. His eyes were hollow. Then the house stops whispering and starts speaking. He handed her the candle. Next time you wake, follow the music. She woke with a start. Music? There was no music. Until there was. Soft. From the West Wing. A piano. She hadn't seen a piano in the house before. She rose. Walked barefoot through the halls. The chandeliers flickered as she passed. The portraits turned their heads. Whispered things she couldn't catch. The West Wing had been sealed. Dusty. Forgotten. Now its doors stood open. She stepped inside. The music was coming from a room with a cracked door. She pushed it open. A grand piano sat in the center. A man played it. He looked up, and Eloise screamed. Because the man had her father's face. The man at the piano did not vanish. He rose slowly, the melody breaking into silence mid-note, and looked at Eloise as if she were someone he hadn't seen in decades. Hello, little Lark, he said. Her knees buckled, and she gripped the doorframe. That name. No one called her that except, Dad? She whispered. But he was dead. He had died with her mother in a storm of twisted metal and shattered glass. That's what she had always been told. He smiled softly, walking toward her with hands raised in peace. You remember the music box, don't you? The one that sang in winter? She shook her head. This was impossible. You're not real, she said. You're part of this house's trick. Another vision, another ghost. He stopped, inches from her. And yet I know what they never told you. About the binding. About why your mother tried to run. She froze. What binding? He looked at the grand piano. Sit. I'll show you. Reluctantly, Eloise sat beside him. He lifted the fallboard and placed her hands on the keys. They were cold, smooth. Then he began to play a single-note rhythm, guiding her fingers into melody. Her hands moved instinctively, as if trained. And suddenly, she remembered. Warmth. A fire. Her mother's voice. A small piano bench. She had played this piece before, but not here. In another room, a nursery filled with books and soft light. A hidden memory. When the piece ended, he took her hands in his. The binding is a covenant. Made by your bloodline generations ago. One heir. One memory. The price of protection. The cost of forgetting. She stared at him, breath shallow. You were supposed to forget me, he continued. Your mother agreed to that. But the house didn't. Why? Because you were the last, and it needed you to remember. To finish what she could not. Tears burned her eyes. Are you real? She whispered. He said nothing. Then the wind howled, and the door slammed open. A blast of cold air filled the room. Her father vanished. Back in her bedroom, she sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by papers, letters, and journals. She had opened every drawer in the housekeeper's room, every chest in the attic. Pieces of her family were scattered around her. Her family wasn't cursed. It was bound. To memory. To silence. The binding. She read a crumpled note Iris had written decades ago. The binding is sealed in 3 ways. One by name. One by blood. One by choice. She had unlocked the first 2. Only one remained. In the center of the house stood the atrium. A glass-roofed dome overgrown with vines. She hadn't noticed the strange floor mosaic before. It was a tree with bare roots. Names etched in each branch. At the base, hers, Eloise Marston, and beside it a fresh etching. Just carved. Lillian. Her mother. The vine on the mosaic pulsed faintly. She knelt and touched the carving. The stone was warm. Then the entire floor shifted. Lowered. A staircase revealed beneath it. And from below, the sound of breathing. Not hers. Not wind. Something waiting. She descended. The chamber below was circular, stone-walled, candlelit. Carvings marked every surface names, dates, symbols. At the center, a basin. And next to it, Iris. You came, Iris said without turning. What is this? Eloise asked. The binding circle. Your mother tried to sever it. Failed. You must decide what to do now. What happens if I refuse? Then the house forgets you again, but not gently, not painlessly. And if I accept, then you inherit everything. Memory, power, burden. Eloise stepped closer. What do I have to do? Iris handed her a knife. Blood seals. And blood freeze. Eloise stared at the blade. She had come this far. She had faced ghosts, lies, and echoes. She had seen her father, heard Silas, followed music into the mouth of madness. She cut her palm. Let the blood drip into the basin. The basin flared with light, and the house sang. Nota melodie. A name. Her name. Eloise. Then silence. Iris stepped back. It is done. You are the last. And the first. Will the house stop now? Eloise asked. Iris looked around the chamber. Number, but now it will listen to you. Eloise stood straighter. For the first time in her life, she felt complete. But the echoes were not over. They had only begun. Eloise stood in the binding circle long after Iris left. The air was heavy with the scent of burnt herbs and warm iron. The floor had returned to stone. But the memory of what she had done of what the house now knew lingered like smoke. She walked back through the passages of Bellwether barefoot, trailing silent echoes with each step. Something had changed. The walls no longer pulsed with unfamiliar cold. Instead, they breathed with her, warm and alive, as though the house now recognized her as one of its own. That evening, the dining room had been set. Eloise hadn't done it, nor had Iris. Yet the long oak table was lit with tall candles. 3 places were arranged down at each end, one in the middle. At the center sat a journal. Eloise sat before it and opened the leather cover. Inside, her mother's handwriting bloomed across the yellowed pages. To the last heir, I tried to spare you. I tried to spare myself. But memory cannot be buried in silence forever. Page after page poured out a confession. Her mother Lillian had made the binding in desperation. Eloise had been born ill doctors, unsure if she would live. But Bellwether offered a choice. A memory for a future. If Lillian would surrender the memory of her child, Eloise would live. In return, the house would carry the burden. But it had not been enough. Over time, Lillian's mind fractured. The memory she tried to forget became a wound Bellwether could no longer contain. Her madness was not illness, it was grief refusing to die. She died not in a car crash but within the very walls of the house, and Eloise had been sent away to protect her from the unraveling. A thud broke her reading. She turned. A shadow in the doorway. Silas. But older now. Not the boy. A man. He stepped forward. "Do you see now?" he asked. "I do," Eloise said. "I see everything." Silas nodded. "Then you're ready." "For what?" "To unseal the last memory." He led her down a hallway that hadn't existed before. Behind a tapestry, a stone door waited, etched with vines. Silas placed his palm to it. The vines parted. Within was a nursery, dust-covered, frozen in time, books still stacked beside a wooden crib. A rocking horse. A velvet bear. Eloise stepped inside. Her breath caught. "I remember this," she whispered. "Your mother sang here," Silas said. "And so did the house." Eloise touched the crib. A rush of sound filled her ear slaughter, lullabies, weeping. And then, a scream. Her mother's? She fell to her knees. Silas placed a hand on her shoulder. She couldn't undo it. She tried. But she couldn't take back the binding. She died. Trying. Eloise looked up. "And now?" Silas met her eyes. "Now you decide if the house remains a tomb or becomes something else." That night, Eloise walked the halls until sunrise. In every window, she saw her reflection slowly change. No longer fearful, no longer searching. At dawn, she opened every door in Bellwether, room by room, memory by memory. She let the portrait speak. She let the house echo. And then she wrote, page after page, of everything, of Lillian, of Iris, of Silas, of herself, so that the next heir would not inherit silence. And when the house sang her name again, it was not a warning. It was a welcome. Bellwether did not sleep. It pulsed. It remembered. And for the first time, it listened. Eloise stood on the rooftop garden, where stone gargoyles guarded the corners and ivy curled like breath around her boots. The lake glistened far below, still and vast, like a mirror held to the sky. Sunrise brushed the horizon. She wore her mother's cloak-deep green velvet, heavy with time, a relic of those who came before. She hadn't slept. Not truly. She no longer needed to. The binding had changed her, not in body, not in mind, but in place. Bellwether had chosen. And in choosing, it had passed everything into her hands. But power, she learned, was not a throne or a title. It was memory. It was grief. It was the act of choosing again. Iris returned at mid-morning. She knocked once and entered without waiting. "There's a letter," she said simply. Eloise took it. Thick parchment, wax seal, a symbol she now understood, a tree whose roots formed a key. She broke the seal. Inside, a summons. The Council of Warding. A name whispered once in the journals. Keepers of houses like Bellwether. Stewards of hidden inheritances. They knew of the binding, and now they knew it had changed. "They want you to appear," Iris said, "as heir and witness." Eloise folded the letter. "Then I will." The meeting took place in an old courthouse turned sanctuary in Charleston. Eloise arrived alone. She wore black. Not mourning. Not vanity. Just clarity. 9 seats ringed the chamber. The council, in wool and linen, parchment and stone. "Bellwether has broken tradition," one said. "It has made a new heir without sanction," said another. Eloise said nothing. She placed the journal on the center table. Her mother's words open for all to see. "She made the bargain," Eloise said. "And she broke under it. The binding failed her." A pause. A woman with silver braids spoke. "And you?" I accepted the binding. I fulfilled it. But I will not repeat it. Not for my child. Not for the next. The council murmured. You break a legacy of silence, said the elder. Eloise nodded. I do. Another pause. Then, so be it. The quiet crown passes. Bellwether is yours. Back home, winter crept in. Snow kissed the windowsills. Fires crackled. Bellwether was quieter now, not mute, just content. Silas had gone. Where? She didn't ask. The boy in the mirrors had vanished. The man in the piano room left no notes behind. Iris retired, left a single envelope and her keys, said she had seen too much and earned her peace. Eloise lived alone for a while. Then letters began to arrive. From others. From heirs of broken estates. From children who heard music where no sound played. From women who remembered things they'd never seen. She wrote back to each. Come, she said. There's room. And Bellwether opened its doors. Years passed. And one day, a child stood at the base of the great mosaic in the atrium. A little girl. Freckled. Dark-haired. Curious. Mom, she asked. Eloise knelt. Yes, love? Why is your name in the roots? Because I remembered. The girl touched the tree. Will I be there too someday? Eloise smiled. Number, we're planting a new tree. One without silence. And the house sang again. But this time, it was not a name. It was a lullaby.